follow the leading of the Spirit. So I want Rob to come back. He's going to sing the same song. And I've already kind of told him what Spirit was asking for me to tell him. And he's just going to sing the song from another place. He's already sung it from a place that we've heard. There's something else. And the band will kind of get in where they fit in, but Rob's going to lead the way. Go ahead, Rob. Rain for me when my heart is sinking fast, holding on to what I thought would last. Oh, lift me up, yeah. When I can't let go, I'm wrapped in love. When you pray for me. Keep going, Rob. Well, pray for me when things are upside down. All seems lost when no love to be found. There's a blessing in every breath. I'm so wrapped in love when you pray for me. So this is what Beth asked all of us for months and months and months. And it can be very difficult to adjust to how we're called to flow in the midst of a world that seems to pull things away from us with the tide that we love as much as it gives things to us. So Rob's got another little bit that he's going to sing, and I want you to think of anyone or everyone you missed, anyone or everyone that has ever touched your life, the teacher you have no idea from the third grade where she might be, where my Miss Brown, my fourth grade teacher might be, I have no idea. But what I can do is send out and allow myself to receive an echo from eternity, and to know that even as I've ever had a prayer request, as I hold the answer to my prayer, as I hold the answer to anyone who's ever prayed before, that this existence in eternity has always gone on and it's always flowing. And so whether it's a Beth, or it's a Francis Bernard Beckwith Sr., whoever it is, let them hear. Pray for me, and I will make it through from this place. I can see what is true. There is a blessing in every breath. The love that's real beyond the veil of death. Pray for me. Oh, pray for me. Yeah, yeah. I'll pray for you as you pray our world, and this community is in the celebration in the morning time, sort of like how that sliver of eternity exists somewhere between the darkness and the dawn. There are some mornings where you wake up and all the sun is out, and you see everything. There's some moments where it's dark and the storm clouds are out, so it hides the sun so you don't really see that crest, and it brightens up your house. And then suddenly, bam, all the light floods in. The thing about it all is this is eternity. Yesterday, when it was today, was eternity. And there's something about how we choose to navigate the world that sometimes helps us, and sometimes it imprisons us and prevents us from being able to catch it. And when I say catch it, I mean that thing. I mean the presence. I mean God. Even that word God, it has such a charge to it because people have used it in so many ways. Even just shifting from the word God to love. Talk about a word people have used a bunch of ways, right? And so we have this thing, and I've been talking to a few friends over the past week about what's the clean language I could use? How horrible the English language is for really communicating something other than sort of structural things. For most of us who haven't really explored it, English is not even its own language. English is the amalgamation, sort of a bastardization of many languages. And that's why people who come from other cultures have such a hard time learning English, because there are certain things and patterns within the English language that look familiar to people who speak Spanish or people who speak Italian or people who might speak Greek. But then it goes left. It goes from the Italian influence to the Latin influence. It goes from the Latin influence to the German influence. And so, you never wonder why you use words like sauerkraut to describe things. You use words like hors d'oeuvres to describe things. We don't have our own words for things. And so many of them we've taken from other groups and peoples. And so when we enter into this idea of consciousness, of God, of the presence, of holiness, of a journey, and we start trying to talk about something that's beyond the human experience, the English language can be such a trying language to try to navigate. It does a really good job of creating a whole bunch of new words because English is not a very old language. But sometimes the more we create new words, the more of us moves into our intellect and out of our heart. Because we move into an intellectual, conceptual idea of a thing that can truly only be felt. How many of you have ever created anything? It could be art in a class when you were in elementary school, or maybe you wrote a song, or you did something like that. And there's all these things like when you're a little kid that the teacher's trying to get you to learn, and then many of you, if you were born in the 70s, you had the colored by numbers things at a certain point, and you had people were coloring trees, and then there was one kid that colored the tree in purple, and then the teacher was like, no, trees are brown and green, and they kind of drew it in a particular way, and then you go out into the world and you see people and you're like, but trees don't even look like that. Trees are not just this, like that big, like they basically grow a stem, like with a wide base and an afro on top of it and call it a tree. How many of you have ever seen trees like that? Have you seen them drawn, but are they in nature? They're almost never in nature. And so there's this idea of creation where we're trying to create things that kind of go sort of a similar way. English and some of our language gives us these structures that we're used to kind of navigating things with, but they're not always the highest and best way to try to navigate. The topic that I'm speaking from today is around this idea of your feelings, your emotions, the language you use, and then what you actually see. Your feelings, your emotions, the experience you have, and what you actually feel, and your feelings, your emotions, and all of the experiences that you're having, and what you're actually living. You see, there's so many concepts that this society gives us, whether it's about what it means to be a parent, whether it is about what it means to be a good Christian, a good Muslim, whether it's what it means to meditate or whatever. But so much of that stuff is through other people's experiences. one of the challenges that I'm navigating as a student of spirituality is that moving from a book that I was raised in, which was basically the Bible. I was raised with the Bible like most people in America, generally the predominant religion in this country. And then moving out of being driven primarily by the Bible and seeing, one, more historical aspects of the Bible. So just, what was actually happening around the world in the time periods, because I'm a former history teacher. So then I was like, wait a second. Some of this stuff doesn't align. There's just historical fact. And then there's just the idea of, well, who are the people that the book was written to? Because we rarely ever actually talk about the Hebrews. And we rarely actually have any familiarity with their language. The Bible definitely wasn't written in Latin. It wasn't written in Greek. But all of the translations that we have of it are from those people, or from the priests, or from the people who did the translating. And especially when you get into the words of Jesus, Jesus spoke what is almost a dead language now, which is, anybody know? Aramaic. How many of you have friends that speak Aramaic? I've got one. There you go. Lynn knows Dr. Erico, right? And those of you that know Reverend Joanne, she may not speak it fluently as a language, but as a student, she can translate the words and speak the words in their accurate expression. How many of you have heard the phrase, let's see, I'm trying to think of a good colloquialism. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's a colloquialism we're all familiar with, right? The Bible is filled with colloquialisms that none of us can identify. And we can't identify them because we're not familiar with the people or the language, and so what do? We take it literally. So if we were to take the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, we would think that maybe there was a gravitational phenomenon going on in certain regions, and maybe we should stay away from apple trees. Erykah Badu has a song about it. Like, no. And so there's just this interesting thing that we can take a deeper dive with. We can take a deeper dive with the idea of prayer. Rob sang about pray for me, and moving from this idea that there's a presence that we're begging and beseeching, that we have to plead, that the better we beg, the better we plead, the more likely we are. What kind of parent, God, divine presence have we created? What kind of identity do we have of a presence that is not as giving as the kindest grandmother? Like, grandmothers really don't need, you want to talk about the pushovers in the family? The grandmothers almost never have to be begged for anything. They slide it into your pocket on your way out the door. Your mom and dad never know. You're sitting in the back seat chewing on something. Where'd you get that? Nowhere. Rob, granddad, you've seen his grandson running around here. That boy is spoiled to life. Because it's a givingness. A parent has a different responsibility than a grandparent. And my father, when he was alive, man, you want to talk about somebody that was unrecognizable. I used to talk to my brother, and we would look at each other and see how he treated his grandchildren. We're like, who is this guy? I just don't understand it. And so as we look at the world that we're living in, it's very much about having an idea of the journey. And so while we recognize that there are these things we call spiritual principles, there are these things that we call spiritual laws, there are these things that are coming up that we call truths, there is a clear idea that we've already received when we were born into this world, and it's just limitation. We've all been told at some point that there's some limit. There's some limit on me based upon how old I am. There's some limit based upon me on how tall or how short I am. The NBA is still not returning my calls. There's some limits to this existence based upon our location. But have you wondered why the internet? Have you wondered why something exists now that literally means that almost every part of the world is connected for the first time in all of existence? If you've got a satellite dish, you can talk to anyone in the remotest part of the world. You don't have to have a modem or some fancy DSL set up. AT&T doesn't have to be your provider. You can connect to people everywhere, but why is it happening now? It's sort of like why things didn't happen before. Many of us go through journeys and we hear this idea that the youth is wasted on who? You guys, how many times y'all said that? A friend of mine said that to me the other day, and I just thought about it, and I was like, man, I'm so glad that I don't have that kind of rascally energy now that I had back then. I don't need it. I'm moving in a different way. I move so much slower now than ever. So much, and right, I know, Lynn, I move pretty fast still. But I move so much slower now because there's spaces and places where I realize how much I missed. There were so many things, like our culture is driven by the idea of multitasking. Many of you that work either in the political field or you might work in offices or businesses or corporations, and there's always this idea of being able to do more than one thing at a time. Then how good can I be at the one thing? It doesn't mean that you don't have many skills, but your attention to detail, your attention and your presence, especially if you're in a field that requires you to actually be with someone. How can I be with someone when I'm also thinking about filing their paperwork, when I'm also thinking about how quickly can I get to the next person? And sometimes we do that to people when we're going for fast food. I know none of you go to the fast food restaurants. I know that you never do that. I'll give you my order later. But the idea of how we move in the world is based on all of these ideas that have been presented to us. Some of the ideas are recycled ideas from our parents. They don't even really like them, but they kept bringing them forward because that's what their parents gave them. Some of the ideas are from politicians and political figures. Some of them are ideas through parents. Even to the idea that a baby can't cry in a room and that we can't also focus and listen is also alien idea, right? It's like, why does everything have to be so, why can't you be more focused? And that's one of the things that we talked about at Agape. Reverend Michael would always tell people, and it would drive other people crazy, like, no, we don't kick the babies out. What field do you want the baby to be in? And what way do you want a parent to be made feel? Do you want a parent because they have a child and they come to a spiritual center to feel welcome and embraced? Yes. And that's what we do here. Meditation might be a little different. Some of us aren't up there yet. We haven't built up our meditative muscles yet to be able to lovingly bless that trying child and then stay centered. But that's how it works. I've talked about that in here before, right? That when we meditate, it's not about trying to find a place in the silence outside of us. It's about trying to find that place of stillness within us no matter what is going on outside of us. But that is like what brought my attention to this journey about what we're seeing. What are you seeing in the world today? I saw one of the greatest things in my life go down my social media timeline today. Yesterday, a very wealthy man named Robert Smith was the keynote speaker at Morehouse College. How many of you are familiar with Morehouse College? Morehouse College graduates more African American men through university than any college in the country every single year. How many of you guys are familiar with college debt? Anybody still paying off college debt and can't even remember all your teachers? Robert Smith is a billionaire, and he gave the keynote address, and during his keynote address on Saturday, he said he had announced earlier that he was going to give a $1.5 million donation to the university. That's amazing, right? But it got better. Right there in the middle of his talk, he said that he was going to pay off, and they were setting up the fund to pay off all of the student debt of every college graduate in that graduating class. That the 2019 class of Morehouse College would all graduate from college without debt. One mother said that means $70,000 for her son.
And this would be the people who are getting PhDs, master's degrees, undergraduate degrees, whatever degree you got that year, you are coming out free and clear. How amazing is that? That is amazing, while we're also hearing all kinds of other news, right? Even without going into all of the other news and all the other posts that make you angry or that make you sad, or the reports from the doctor that you hear from friends and family, or the fact that we don't have Beth here in the physical, that we of course feel some kind of way about that and we miss that. But man, if Beth wasn't on her business and handling it so that when she was gone, she would still live. If she wasn't doing that, because we hadn't created Soul Center, because then we wouldn't have had Enlightened Kids every Sunday, so then thousands and thousands of people, because it doesn't end here on May 19th. Enlightened Kids is going on, Soul Center is going on, it's continuing to expand. I know that 1,000 people easily have come through these doors over the 5 years, and even more will come, but what are we seeing? And once we see it, what is our interpretation and impression of it, right? So I was talking about the English language, and we have a desire when we look at things to try to give them meaning. And so our practice in meditation is about being able to see the thing, observe it, and just that. Not my preference. I wish it were a little more red. It's not red enough. Maybe a little more green. Green is my least favorite color. A friend of mine was like, green is my least favorite color. I was like, man, money is green. How could you not like, I mean, green is everywhere. It's the grass. You must have rough days. You don't like green. So we went in on that, and I haven't heard much about him not liking green much lately. I just need you to embrace it. Maybe you like Bitcoin. I don't know how that's working out for you, but money's green, brother. So we kind of talk about those things, and it's about what we see. And it's not just what you see with your eyes, because you know you don't see with your eyes. You see through your eyes even as much as you see through your glasses. You see, what you see with is way back here. It's actually not even in here. Because the physical piece of you is just the mechanism you're doing all of this through. And this is scientifically based. You can find the research on it. Quantum physics talks about this and so much more. You're existing in this shell, but it's not about whether or not your eyes see. Stevie Wonder paints amazing pictures, and he's almost never seen a day in his life since his childhood. Same thing with Ray Charles. They didn't need to see it. And yes, they could hear the music, but they had to be able to feel with their hands. And they painted pictures of things that we still see to this day. So it's never just about what our eyes see, it's what you perceive. It's all about your own perception and your awareness of it. And the same thing goes with what you're hearing. How many of you have ever thought somebody called you? Like you're walking through it and you thought you heard, you turn around? Nobody would be calling me here. And sometimes you're right though, aren't you? Sometimes you think you hear somebody call your name, and you're wrong. Rob will tell you sometimes people think they're singing the right note, and they're not. It's never Rob. Sometimes you hear, like we remember the game Telephone when we were kids, right? It's really, the game Telephone is like this amazing mystical practice of impossibility. Because once you have more than 3 or 4 people, it almost is always wrong. Because you whisper something into somebody's ear on one end, and they're all supposed to whisper the same thing, but by the time it gets over here, it's something completely different. That's very much like what the news is like today. By the time it gets to us from the broadcaster, I work with kids now on a regular basis, and I was talking to them about why the news chooses what to advertise, what stories to tell. Primarily, the news chooses what story to tell based on what you're going to be most interested in. And unfortunately, what we're most interested in by the human behavior is bad news. Things that make us afraid. We want to know about all the bad stuff for some reason. That's why there's not more good news. Because they've tried it. They run, they want to know whether you're there or not. Once Once the news began to be driven by products and advertising, they had to, decide how much more or less they would charge. So it depends on how many of your eyeballs are there. And you're just, maybe not you, society's just not that interested in good news. And there's just something about the human behavior pattern. But we get to choose that. And yet, what we see, what we hear, and what we live. When we start talking about what we live, it brings to mind for me the idea of driving. So this morning, before I came here, I went to Agape. We set up at Agape, and I went to the Way of Meditation service. We sat down, and I was waiting for Terry. She came out here. Those of you that were at Course in Miracles the other day, Terry was there. She's a wonderful practitioner. Also does our daily prayer call for me sometimes when I'm not doing it. And Terry got into a fender bender on her way in. Everything's fine. She didn't beat anybody up. She's pretty peaceful. And she asked the lady what she was doing. She said she was listening to Deepak Chopra. The lady was on her way to Agape. And it was like 2 blocks away. And it was just about a little bit of a distraction. You know how it goes. And just boom, right in the back of Terry. And it really continued to kind of work over my mind, because what we have very little skill in is using our full perception. So when I was in high school, in middle school, I was in a marching band. Yes, I was. Mr. Meyer, one of the best music teachers ever, Elliott Middle School in Pasadena. And when you're in the marching band, thank you, Brian. When you're in the marching band, your whole idea is to maintain the lines, right? To maintain the lines to the right of you and the left of you and in front of you. So how do you do that? And I was a clarinet player, so this does actually work. How do you do that and keep looking forward? Because the parade route generally turns or whatever you're doing, and you use your peripheral vision, right? And so how many of you activate your spiritual peripheral vision? How many of you are able to see more than what's right in front of you? I don't know if that's so much of a redundant question as it is, do you recognize that you do use this more than you realize? There's always so much activity going on. Have you ever noticed when you see something out of the corner of your eye that's falling over and you're able to turn and try to grab it, like that scene, like the old scene in The Matrix, where Neo goes to see the Oracle, and she tells him to watch out for the pot, and he turns and he knocks over the pot. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry. And she goes to him, he's like, what's really going to get you is you're going to try to figure out if I wouldn't have said anything to you, would you have knocked it over? And so there's this idea of whether her words and what she said was the cause, or whether it was coming anyway, and she just dropped in on him right beforehand. This is a lot of what this life is like. So much news comes at us from politicians, and they're just the worst world is going to happen. War with Iran. We're going to move the whole aircraft carrier fleet into the Gulf. You know, there's worry about the food systems and GMOs, and there's worry. And then there's what you choose to do. It's whether or not you have the ability that while all that stuff is kind of coming your way to navigate it. It's the same tools that you use when you drive on the freeway. You drive on the freeway very well, don't you? You're like the best. Forget about everybody else. They're the problem. And as you're navigating down the road, you're able to see, maybe I should slow down, maybe I should accelerate. Maybe I should change lanes. Have you ever changed lanes just because you see somebody doing something a little wonky ahead of you? Have you ever accelerated just because you saw that maybe something over here, it would probably be better that I got away from that car? The same thing happens in your life. If you don't know what your purpose is, if you don't know what this grand gift is to you, the first thing that you need to know is that simply this: you being the fullest version of you is your purpose. Now that can look like being a mechanical engineer. It can look like being a singer. It can look like being a parent. It could look like being a foster parent. None of us are just one of any of these things. It could look like being a woodworker and building things and creating art. It could look like serving in a spiritual center. None of us are any one of these things. But we must be able to tune ourselves in and to listen to our interests and see the directions that we're pulled in. Also, notice the areas that we're pushed away from. Being able to use our word and to use our language and to be able to say yes, and sometimes being able to say no, and being filled as equally empowered with our no and with our yes. There's so much that comes along with this, but it's a lot more simple than the world makes it out to be. I love Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul Sunday, but sometimes I feel like they set the bar so high that people forget that their everyday existence is divine. There's this illusion of what a miracle is, and that the miracle has to be some great leap beyond what I could imagine. But we have to understand, if you ever watch some of these, anybody ever watch like the National Geographic documentary style kinds of things that kind of show the planet and they show all of these different ecosystems? If you watch any of those things, you will see that life in and of itself on this planet, that life exists here on earth at all, is the first miracle. Just the fact that life exists. Like the earth, before all of the asteroids came, before the dinosaurs and everything else, was not a place we could kick it. The air wasn't breathable for human beings when the earth was first shaped and formed, and we know all this through science, and so we don't have to throw away science just because we're spiritual and we recognize that there's some pattern and there's something more that is happening. And at the same time, I'm wanting you to embrace that your very life, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you will go through, is a miracle. So like you should put that in your front pocket, the one that's easy to access. And just know, like when you slip your hand in your pocket, or if you've got a skirt on, when you hunch it up a little bit, maybe that'll work. Rob, when you wear your skirt, just hunch it up.
Shave your legs first.
Yeah, well, please. He's gonna do us all a favor and shave his legs first. But as you do that, if you put in your front pocket that you're a miracle, then every experience has the opportunity to be something that you can embrace. That means that if you go through a very difficult prognosis from your doctor, I'm still a miracle. What are we gonna do?
Right.
You know, if you have a miscarriage, I had a miscarriage, the fact that the child came in to be at all, but I'm a miracle, so what are we going to do? Because I'm still here. If you have, a serious financial letdown and you're struggling, you don't know where I'm still a miracle, so look, what are we going to do? Creation has to keep creating. I'm still here. The fact that I'm living and that I'm breathing means that more of me is supposed to be in this world, and I'm not choosing to live on the street. I'm not choosing to be without everything. I'm not choosing to not have family and friends and people that are close to me. So presence, what are we going to do? And that availability is not a question of it that affirms that it's not there. That is giving the request to the universe for your marching orders. How many of you almost always turn on your Waze or Google Maps now when you're going somewhere? Right? Almost always. Like even places I know where I'm going, because there's an extra piece of information in that app now that I never had before. Traffic conditions, baby. This is what your prayer life is like. This is what your meditation field is for. You shouldn't leave the house without a moment of awakened awareness and stillness. How long is a moment? Exactly. It's simply a moment. A practitioner at Agape, she's also one of our board members, Karen Mills Alston, will say sometimes if she's, and I do this now because she said this to me a long time ago, she will not leave her house without at least stopping, holding onto the doorknob, and taking a breath. Inviting the presence to guide her, to lead her, and to catch the information. When people say they hear from God, do you understand what they mean? Do you ever wonder what they mean? Do you ever wonder if it was audible? I mean, they did say hear, right? But do you ever use hear and it's not audible? It's a text message sometimes. Do you think God texts people?
Yes.
Sometimes.
Yes.
The reason why I bring that up as I'm beginning to close is this. Are you available to hear from Spirit, the presence, God, in a way that you will recognize and comprehend?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you?
Yes.
Yes.
So guess what it will do? It will communicate with you in a way that you will comprehend and understand, and you will recognize. And the more that you listen to it, the more that you give it your attention, the better you are at understanding it. How many people speak more than one language in this room? Other than English, what are the languages in the room? Spanish. What else? Just Spanish? Japanese. We have any Farsi in the room? So there's so many different languages, right? And those of you that speak more than one language, it's like these. Somebody spoke music. Somebody said that,
Yes.
David. He's funny and he's right. Have you ever listened to a piece of music and you were like,
Yes.
how did they hear that?
Yeah.
And my theory is, and no, I don't want y'all opinion, musicians, like you would know. Of course they would. My opinion is that they've allowed themselves to hear things differently. Because when you hear orchestrations, where there's like 17 instruments, if you've never listened to the Love Unlimited Orchestra, I know all these guys have, and probably most of you don't realize that it's a real orchestra, and it's amazing, and yes, it's Barry White's orchestra. But he didn't just have a band. Barry White actually had an orchestra. And he created sounds that still to this day have never been replicated in terms of the fullness. I mean, we think of Tchaikovsky, we think of all these names. I'm telling you, your homework, go listen to the Love Unlimited Orchestra. and maybe you'll have shoes as cool as our guitar player when it's all said and done. And I'm just going to say I'm so glad he has those shoes on, because his early shoes were some comfortable walking shoes. And I was like, oh, okay, I see what we're doing. Did you get the message today? Did you get that you have the access to all of this stuff? Did you get that energy to move through you? Did Beth visit you today? Did you have a sense of how you're supposed to be in the world? And can any of you think of something right now that maybe you haven't yet contributed to Soul Center that you can? Can any of you think of ways that maybe you can show up at Soul Center that maybe you haven't yet? What about on your job or with your family? If you can answer yes to any of those questions, I know that I've done my job. And I know that we're going to literally make the world a better place, because we take this out into the world and it lives as us. Let's turn with them for a moment of prayer. Blessings on blessings on blessings on blessings. I'm so very grateful for this community, for the life, for the movement, for the energy that is Soul Center OC. I bless every life here, for there is only one life, that omnipotent, omnipresent, omniactive, omniscient force, which we call Spirit, God, Jehovah, Allah, the great I am. And we know it is our very lives, and we are united in conscious awareness, for we are one with each other. And so I bless our hearts today that some are continuing the waves of mourning. And I'm knowing the high idea of Beth Morley continues to radiate through all of us. I'm knowing the high idea of Francis Bernard Beckwith radiates through us. And all of our loved ones who are on the other side of the veil, if there is anyone that is on your heart or mind that has gifted you anything in your life that you're grateful for, speak their name. You can just say it softly to yourself. Wesley Mitchell, Janetta Mitchell, Chester Mitchell. I'm so grateful for all of this, because we are being supported by that other side of the veil. We're divinely guided and supported in all things. And so I bless the healing, I bless the liberation, I bless the transformation, I bless us as we transcend the limited idea of what we see and what we hear, that we embrace a fuller idea of our livingness today. I know that it is so with our lives, as our lives, for the presence communicates to us, guides us in a way that we can hear and recognize. I simply know that it is so and declare it by simply saying, and so it is. Amen. Good. So now is another sacred opportunity that we have together as our ushers are going to come forward. This community, as Giovanna has spoke earlier, is a sacred service community. It is also sustained by your donations and contributions. And it's not just that you donate in support of Soul Center, but that it is a part of your life. And if Soul Center is making a difference in your life and is contributing to you in any way, even before you come, adjust your way of giving and being and preparing for Sunday service. See if there are ways that you can prepare, whether you want to start deciding how much I'm going to give because it's a part of my budget now. Because you're going to start changing how you give because I'm a part of the ongoing expansion and unfoldment of Soul Center. Yes?
Yes.
So as Rob comes up and begins to sing, you're in the hands of our ushers. Go ahead.